Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly raw and deeply personal. An essay by a man named Jeremy Smith. We're going to walk through his journey of recovery from alcohol abuse. But we're not just skimming the surface here. We are digging into the psychological terrain of his trauma, the coping mechanisms he built, and ultimately, this really powerful choice he made to reclaim his own life. Right out of the gate, Jeremy hits us with this startlingly honest admission. He doesn't give us some generic speech demonizing alcohol. Actually, he admits that he likes it. He literally talks about this fantasy of just doing whatever he wants with unlimited reserves of beer at his disposal. And by starting there, it kind of reframes the whole thing, right? It shows us that recovery isn't always about hating the substance. It's about realizing that this persistent desire to drink just isn't healthy anymore, even if letting it go feels like this huge, profound sacrifice.
And what's super fascinating here is how he contrasts his two states of being. On one hand, drinking is his way to medicate himself into what he calls a catatonic observer of life. Basically, he's just sitting on the sidelines so he doesn't have to risk any more loss or abuse. It's a shield. But then on the flip side, when he strings together even a tiny win without alcohol, he gets focused, he gets driven, he gains clarity. So you have this really stark contrast that perfectly sets up the intense internal battle he's fighting every single day.
But before we dig into the why, we really need to understand the what. And the toll this has taken on his adult life over the last decade is severe. I mean, he hasn't had a driver's license since 2010. Just think about that for a second. That is a massive barrier to holding down a job. He talks about deteriorating relationships, zero motivation, and literally losing the ability to clearly articulate arguments to resolve conflicts. For years, he just masked all of this. He convinced himself that drinking was subduing this quote-unquote murderous, hate-filled monster inside him. But really, it just left him entirely hopeless, convinced that catastrophe was coming for him no matter what.
So, to make sense of this destructive cycle, we have to pivot away from those present-day symptoms. We need to look at the harrowing psychological history that was actually driving these cravings. Because, let's be real, addiction almost never exists in a vacuum. If we want to understand why Jeremy felt the need to become that catatonic observer, we have to look closely at the environment that made him feel like he needed to hide in the first place.
And when you lay out the timeline of his trauma, it's just heavy hit after heavy hit. As a kid, he was tortured by his own brother, who was acting out because of their father's physical abuse. And his father, who struggled with PTSD and heavy drinking, tragically ended up murdering Jeremy's mother and her boyfriend before taking his own life. Later, as a young adult, Jeremy joined the Marine Corps, desperately hoping to learn some kind of conflict resolution so he could come back and somehow fix his broken family. But when he returned, his healthy communication was literally a foreign language to them. And that ultimately led him, just 3 years ago, to flee for his life into total isolation. Now think about the terrifying weight of these 5 words from his family. You're just like your daddy. Because Jeremy physically looked like his dad, he became this pawn in his family's toxic ego games, and he internalized that. It wasn't just an insult, it was like a curse. He lived with this pervasive, suffocating fear that he was just destined to become his abusive father. I mean, imagine carrying that psychological burden around. It's no wonder that for a whole year of his youth, he didn't speak a single word. And it makes total sense why alcohol eventually became the tool he used to break that silence.
Growing up in a house consumed by drugs, anger, and pills forced Jeremy into what is basically the textbook definition of survival mode. He just wasn't equipped with healthy coping skills because, well, his environment never allowed for them. The constant assault on his character meant he internalized every single criticism as a direct attack on who he was. And that kind of chaos, he points out that it was honestly better to be drunk than to sit there sober, listening to yet another angry tirade blaming him for his family's deep-rooted issues. So alcohol wasn't some party for him, it was literally his only learned survival tactic. Once he finally realized he couldn't fix those family dynamics, he fled. But the environment he ran to was just one of even deeper isolation. His routine was just go to work, go home, drink, and push the entire world away. Sitting there alone with these incredibly dark thoughts, he'd watch the rest of the world arguing over massive social issues, while he was personally struggling with deep poverty and homelessness. And it forced him to ask a really heavy question. Does anyone even care that I exist? If working hard just leads to more blame and abuse, what is the point of even participating in life? Which brings us to this dark, existential crossroads. When you're completely isolated, carrying the trauma of a family murder-suicide, fleeing toxic dynamics, and totally convinced you're destined to be a loser, the pull to just give up is immense. Why not just keep drinking? Why not just rest a bit and let the world fall apart anyway? But it's right here, in this exact moment of profound darkness, that his story takes its most critical turn.
This is where the whole narrative completely shifts. Jeremy makes this incredibly profound decision to step across the threshold. He starts moving away from that catatonic past and actually walks toward the empowering light of a future. He realizes that staying numb absolutely guarantees his own destruction, while stepping forward, even though it's incredibly painful, offers at least a glimmer of possibility.
So how exactly does he start crossing that threshold? Well, it's all about experiencing small wins. Jeremy points out that whenever he gets a win in life, he can literally feel his desire to drink diminish. Just by putting the drink down for a short bit, he starts proving to himself that the cycle can in fact be broken. And, almost immediately, he starts seeing a desire to tackle bigger things that used to feel absolutely impossible.
And those small wins quickly snowball into real, actionable steps. We're not talking about abstract concepts here. We're talking about literal, practical shifts in his daily life. Instead of mindlessly scrolling YouTube, he starts using his laptop to build monthly budget spreadsheets. He actually regains the bandwidth to effectively communicate with healthcare and insurance providers. And maybe most importantly for us today, he starts cultivating his love for writing again. These very practical, foundational blocks are exactly how he goes about rebuilding his life.
These actions bring such a beautiful contrast to his earlier numbness, and it leads him to this really powerful realization. There is a clarity of thought and a nurturing I begin to afford myself. Just pay attention to that word, nurturing. After a lifetime of abuse, trauma, and incredibly harsh self-criticism, sobriety is actually allowing Jeremy to care for himself. He's unlocking this newfound clarity that replaces that old catatonic state, and it's giving him the space to write, to think, and to genuinely heal.
Ultimately, Jeremy hits on this vital realization about his motivation. He realizes that his recovery isn't about trying to change his family's cynical opinions, because for the people whose opinions he used to let run his life, it honestly won't matter if he's drunk or sober. So he just stops trying to appease them. Instead, he makes the conscious, active choice to give up drinking so he can drown out their negative beliefs and finally pursue a life filled with friends and family that actually makes him happy.
I absolutely love how this statement just cuts through all the noise and trauma. Yes, selfishly, I fucking matter to me. It is so raw, it's defiant, and it's honestly beautiful. After being told he was cursed, after being used as a pawn, after isolating himself thinking nobody cared, he just boldly declares his own self-worth. He realizes he's meant to do more than just lay prostrate at the feet of his abusers or a society that ignored him. He matters to himself, and that right there is reason enough to save his own life. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to reflect on. How does Jeremy's incredible story shift our entire understanding of addiction? When you really see the deeply traumatic roots, the constant survival mode, and the heavy existential weight he carried around, it completely reframes what it means to choose recovery. It's not just about putting down a drink. It's about this immense, heroic bravery to look at a painful past and boldly say, I matter enough to build a better future. It's an amazing journey and a great reminder to always seek out the profound stories behind the struggles we see every day.